Alright, this is going to be a long one. Masters of Dirt 2021 was an event I knew I needed to make. For those of you who may not already know, Masters of Dirt is a 10th scale RC racing event that takes place every year at Beach RC at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's definitely one of those races and tracks in general that I'd say are definitely worth the travel expenses to visit, like OCRC in California, which is another track I plan to visit eventually. Going back to Masters of Dirt, it's 4 days worth of racing on one of the best tracks in the US, and it's also where some of the best drivers in the world compete to be crowned Master of Dirt. It's also one of the best places to go if you simply want to improve your driving and setup skills. Which leads me to this. This video is not going to be from the perspective of someone who is a top of their class at big events like this. Simply put, even though I'm a small YouTuber who makes basic guides to RC racing, I'm still far away from the likes of Ryan Harris or Kyle Go. This video is going to be from the perspective of an average racer who went there to have fun. If you want a short recap of the results, Dakota Fend is your 2021 Master of Dirt, and Kyle Go is your stock Master of Dirt. Without further delay, let's begin the recap and what I learned. You know, it's strange how things usually work out. Two-wheel drive buggy is usually my comfort zone when it comes to RC racing, but here at Masters of Dirt, it did not go as well as I had hoped. I entered into the two-wheel drive stock class, and in this class I had to run a specific spec tire from J Concepts called the Ellipses. The rules went something like this. As long as you had a razor's edge of tread on the outside of the tire, you were good. For fear of running out of tread and not being able to run, I had delegated myself to wearing down the tires naturally initially. This is a very large mistake as the grip just wasn't really there for the most part. What you're seeing now is my very first time on the track, and to put it mildly, both I and the car were quite bad. As time went on, I realized, however, it wasn't just the tires that were holding me back, it was the whole setup of the car. To put it simply, my buggy wasn't really well set up for dirt. And it wasn't really set up very well, period. You'll see this pop up later again to a much more severe degree. After some much needed help from an associated driver and good friend Chris Van Air, he helped me get the car much more in working order, to a point where I could actually focus more on my driving skill than the setup. This is a good time to bring up that when going to these kinds of events or just races as a whole, it's important to have a decent support group of people you can rely on to help you when you feel lost. And trust me, I was very lost. Chris really did go above and beyond for me when I went on the track. He helped me analyze different parts of the track and how I could take them optimally, and gave me his input on how my car was handling. Considering this is the guy who's repeatedly beat me at my home track, I'm inclined to listen to him. Unfortunately, I simply didn't have the skill needed to put that advice into practice consistently, because by the time I was able to put that advice into practice, I was already halfway done with my main. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. How did qualifying go? Qualifying initially went decent. Even though I was slow, I was able to stay consistent enough to put myself in the middle of the pack. About 24 out of 51, and considering the company I was in, I felt really good about that. The problem was after the second qualifier. I had become complacent and didn't think I needed much to improve. Oh, how I was wrong. Even though my driving was getting better as time went on, so did everyone else's by a much larger margin. As a result, I lost a few positions and landed 31st, which really hurt my feelers. This pushed me in the third qualifier to do two things. I refreshed my car's setups, and my big mistake for this qualifier, I used a brand new set of spec tires which I hadn't been sanded down, causing me to do donuts anytime I went near the throttle until the tires finally wore in mid-race, allowing me to push it a bit harder, but it wasn't enough. This ended up placing me 7th in the D main. Oof. As for the main itself, I didn't record it as I wanted to focus solely on my driving, and to put it lightly, it did not help. With a combination of bad luck and bad driving, in that order, I ended up placing in the same spot I started. I ended up 31st out of 51 overall. It could have gone better, but it was still fun. Oddly, my four-wheel drive buggy performed better than my two-wheel drive buggy. This is odd for two reasons, one of which I'll get to in a bit. But the main reason being that I feel less confident with four-wheel drive 90% of the time. Like 17.5 stock buggy, 13.5 four-wheel drive buggy ran a spec tire, this time the Proline Shadow. Something I mentioned before is that with these spec tires, you need to have a certain amount of tread left on the edges, kind of like a reverse mohawk. This was the case for both the Ellipses and the Shadows for four-wheel drive. You can only get in a certain amount of spec tires, so I didn't want to sand them down for fear of sanding them down too much to the point in which they would not pass tech. This is another mistake. As a result of this, and the other problem I'll get to in a bit, my qualifiers didn't go well. Before the qualifiers even came up though, I managed to break a front bulkhead on my 4-wheel drive, and unfortunately the hobby shop did not have that specific part in stock. Luckily there was a Yokomo team driver there named Chris Folke that did have the part, so he was able to lend it to me for the weekend. With that crisis averted, I drove my 4-wheel drive a bit more sparingly, and when I did drive it, I didn't really push it very hard for fear of breaking another part Chris Folke, or the hobby shop didn't have. With that being said, I was still having issues getting this thing around the track consistently, and that leads me to the number one issue I had with the buggy that was entirely my own fault. Driving the buggy was very difficult as it seemed to be both extremely twitchy at speed, but had little initial turn in. As I was focused more on my 2-wheel drive and my short course at the time, I didn't troubleshoot the problem until the night before the second and third qualifiers, or more accurately, Chris Van Air and Chris Folke troubleshot it. When I initially built the YZ4, I had made the mistake of thinking the caster blocks could be put on either side, and as a result, I had put them on backwards. I had been driving a 4-wheel drive buggy with reverse bump steer for a few months now, and now I feel really dumb. This was fixed very quickly, and I was able to start qualifying much better, and even started to gain some confidence back after my low showing in 2-wheel drive. And that's when we got to the mains. I ended up a bit higher placed in 4-wheel drive buggy than I did with my 2-wheel drive, but not by much. I started my main in the 5th position, and due to some bad luck and bad driving, again in that order, instead of pushing to gain places, I had to push to regain them, and as a result, just like in 2-wheel drive buggy, I finished in the same spot I qualified in. What kinda hurts more so for both 2-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive is that I know my cars had the capability to do better, it's that I wasn't there as a driver to make it happen. Something I intend to work on in the future. But let's not be too down on ourselves. It's time for the one class that really matters. Short course truck was the only open class that I actually ran, and it was by far my most successful despite my few shortcomings that I may have put on myself. Unlike the other two classes, there was no specific tire that you had to run, so it was pretty much whatever tire you felt like sanding down to either a slick or very nearly a slick. As I already had a set of Proline Primes that I used for Hobbytown Columbus, I decided to use those. To put it in short, they worked quite well so long as I stayed in the invisible groove. This is the point in the video where I want to take you to the side and talk a little bit of how the track evolved throughout the day. You see, even though Beach RC did an amazing job of making the track as consistent as possible, nobody can overcome the laws of nature. Because of this, and the night went on and the moisture rose, traction began to wane a bit. This is a problem for spec class as you were already fighting for grip in the first place with those spec tires. Not so much for short course. As long as I didn't drive it like it was turf or carpet, it was a pleasure to drive around the track. Very stable, if a bit lazy, just how I like it. Even with that, I was still able to get around the track pretty quickly to the point in which my truck was actually faster than my 2-wheel drive buggy. As for how the first qualifying went, it went very well. I managed to drive very well and very stable in my heat, and that netted me a spot in 5th overall, putting me ahead of a couple people I did not expect to be ahead of, like Chris Van Air. My next qualifiers did not go as well, however, but it wasn't due to me not being able to drive, it was due to me not being able to drive. Let me explain. Now, as this was my first time at Masters, and because I care a lot about what others think, I didn't want to piss anyone off. This was going fine right up until qualifier 2 of short course truck when I unfortunately did piss someone off. Right here at this jump in the second qualifier, after trying to pass someone a few times and failing, I saw a gap and went for it. Unfortunately, the gap wasn't quite wide enough and I ended up spinning the guy out. What I should have done at the time was pull over and let him pass again so I could overtake him properly, but that's not what I did. I was hopped up on adrenaline and just kept driving. This mentally got to me towards the end of the race, and it caused me to drive a lot slower and a lot less confident. I didn't want to ruin another person's race again. And because of this, I did a lot of pulling over to let people pass in the third qualifier, and this caused me to miss the A main by 1 spot. On the bright side, I was able to start first in the B main, so the chances of me bumping were very good. After refreshing my truck with the Kaylee Hamilton setup except for the gearing, we'll get to that a little bit later, it was time to get into the mains. How did it go? Well, here's your short snippet. In the end, I got first, which secured my spot in the A main, in 9th starting position. I will show you a bit more of what happened during the A main, but I will say compared to what was happening further up the field, it wasn't too interesting. To make a mundane driving experience short, I managed to climb 2 places and ended up 7th overall. I'm pretty happy with that result, as both me and the truck were about as fast as they could get. Or was it? See, the stock spur gear that comes with the SC 6.2 is an 81 tooth spur gear. This is good for mod motors, which usually goes into SETs anyway, but for stock racing, you want something smaller than that. I debated all throughout the weekend as to whether or not running a bigger motor would help. On the one hand, it would help me in the spots where I was losing time to the others, but I would lose drivability in the spots I could do consistently with the truck. In the end, I decided to not go with the bigger motor and just ran with my old 13.5 that I had run since forever, with the 81 tooth spur and a 20 tooth pinion. I definitely regretted this in the main, as I was very much down on power compared to others running the other stock motors. Chris Van Aer ended up taking first place by a long way, but the fight for second place was one worth watching. You'll probably see it in Ryan Harris's next video on Masters of Dirt. I learned a lot that weekend at Beach RC, and there's a lot I could have done differently. For example, I could have tuned in more rear toe on my two-wheel drive buggy to generate a little bit more grip leaving corners. I could have removed the drag brake in the ESC to make entry corners at speed a bit easier. Hell, I could give you a huge shopping list of things I could have done differently, but I'm just going to give you the most crucial points. If you're going to go to one of these events, always go with friends. This is from setup tips to transportation. It will help if there's more than one of you. If you can, hand your car off to someone who knows more than you and either let them examine it or let them drive it to see what you need to do to either make it faster or easier to drive. In that same vein, have them watch your races and have them tell you what you're doing wrong. Make sure you take this criticism constructively, otherwise it means nothing. But most of all, enjoy yourself. At the end of the day, we're racing toy cars. 99% of us don't do it to make money. We do it as an escape from reality. Don't let it tear you down. This is the part of the video where I have to give thanks to a lot of people. First off, my brother Sean, my dad, and Ryan Goyette for basically carrying me through this trip, and many, many other things. Next up, Chris Van Aer for helping me get my stuff ready for the mains and showing me how to properly set up a car and diagnose it, along with coaching me on my driving. Ryan Harris for giving me tips on how to help my channel grow, and tips on editing videos. To Chris Folke for essentially saving my weekend by lending me that part and helping me diagnose my 4-wheel drive buggy. To Kyle Go for generally being an awesome guy, and same thing to Justin Whitaker for being an amazing friend. To my patrons Michael Williams, Lucas Tarka, RC Wilt Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, and lastly, for all of you watching this video now, I genuinely can't thank each and every one of you enough. We've grown a lot for a pretty small channel, and I don't intend to stop now. This has been Roach RC, and I'll see you next time.